Today, let's talk about how far PC cases have come in the last several years, especially with these really big GPUs. I'm going to use two examples. A brand new case that I did a build in, the bequiet Dark Base 901 that has literally the latest in like case technology, if you will. And then a case from 2016 from one of the best boutique builders that they started basically everything that we know about PC gaming back in the 90s, Falcon Northwest, the Mach V. I happen to always build my own computers, but I have a soft spot in my heart for Falcon Northwest because they are one of the original builders, and I happen to really love their cases and the way they actually do their builds. I think they're very thorough and detailed. I just love everything about their cases, and we're going to kind of see how the Mach V compares to a modern case that literally just came out and where basically the bottleneck is. If we throw a GPU like a 4080 or a 4090, can a case like the Mach V handle it? So let's compare both cases, see where they're similar, where things have gotten better, where things have changed. First is going to be in the size. Now, we're talking about two basically monster towers. These are both big cases. The Falcon Northwest is going to be a little bit bigger than this bequiet case, but really not by that much. Obviously, nowadays you can get much smaller PC cases from everywhere, do it yourself. Even Falcon Northwest has had their Tiki cases in the frag box for years, going back way before even this, this particular 2016. But these two cases are these kind of like super towers, so they're big, meaning you can fit a lot of hardware. You can fit certainly almost anything that you want. Proof is that I fit a 4090 even in this older case, and it fit perfectly fine, just like it did in the new case. So that's going to be one of the main elements that you see. That's where these cases really start to differ. So if the size is similar, what's one of the biggest differences you're going to see right away? Well, the Mach V, as you can see, everything is kind of like flipped on its side. So the GPU is going to exhaust the air, hot air is going to rise to the top of the system, and you have these great Silverstone fans on the bottom, on the left and right, 180 millimeter fans. They're generally pretty quiet and just put through a considerable amount of airflow. The idea here is all of the warm air is just going to be pushed out the top of the case. Now, the bequiet case, on the other hand, is going to have a more traditional setup. It's going to be air from the front to the back, or exhausting out the top. Certainly, it has a lot more possibilities for airflow, which is going to be one of the biggest benefits of a modern case compared to something like this, the Mach V. Now, the bequiet case, you can actually invert it and make things upside down, but not quite in the same way as the Mach V, which was a little bit of a unique design back then anyway, and it's going to be even more unique nowadays. We don't really see as many cases with this type of design. Another pretty obvious difference, you'll notice there's no glass panel on this Mach V. Now, interestingly enough, main gear shift, which I've actually done a build in myself on the original main gear shift, they use more or less the same type of case. That one, you could get, a panel. It wasn't glass, but it's like, a plexiglass or something like that, where you can see in. That kind of makes sense because main gear typically will do more like showy builds, like water cooling builds and different things like that. But aside from that, for all practical purposes, the main gear shift and the Falcon Northwest Mach V, they use pretty much the same case, which is based on a Silverstone case. And these are going to be the only two that actually kind of look pretty much identical. The Silverstone case is a little bit different in the materials and the design. But having said that, the Mach V, everything's pretty much monolithic. It's closed. Falcon Northwest does do, painting. Back in the day, they used to actually hand paint these cases, which is absolutely incredible, and I obviously would prefer that to any type of a windowed case. Now they do UV printing and things like that, but back then a painted case was going to be even cooler than a case with a glass panel. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit, I'll go either way. Even this particular one that I have, that's like a monolithic, all black design, I think it looks really, really sick. And the only really thing that's visual, that's different, you're going to have that, little Falcon Falcon logo that lights up on the front. This particular one is not RGB. The newer models like the Talon, they do have RGB now, but this one is just going to be a white logo, which I think looks really cool. Then obviously the Be Quiet case has more tasteful RGB, I would say, like on the bottom and on the front. Even has a phone charger on top. So that's going to be one of the things to kind of make it a little bit different than this older Falcon Northwest case. Now, throw in a 4090 in both cases. The Falcon Northwest case actually handled it pretty well. Like first it fit without any issues, and the airflow, while it wasn't as good as the Be Quiet case because of the the orientation, and that GPU gets really hot, and that case doesn't have quite as many exhaust points for the air to really leave. The 4090 actually performed, within spec. It was maybe a few degrees warmer than it would be in the Be Quiet case, which is really optimal for a GPU like that, with mesh panels everywhere, like on the front, and you have a mesh panel on the top. Basically, the airflow is going to be a lot more open, but you can still do a 4090 in the Mach V, which was pretty impressive without any type of like thermal throttling. Obviously, temperatures are a little bit higher than in the modern case like this, and that case wasn't really, designed for 450 watt GPUs, which didn't really exist back then unless you were doing SLI and different things like that. And a lot of those were blower style. That's another big difference from 2016 to now. We have these big triple fan coolers or double fan or even the Founders design, and obviously back then the Founder editions were basically blower style, so the hot air would just be exhausted out the top, and that's partly why these cases worked so well back then. And now they would need a little bit of updating and maybe a little bit more airflow to make these like pass-through designs and multi-fan setups work a little bit better. Obviously the other big limitation is going to be on the CPU cooling. On this Be Quiet case, you can literally fit almost any size AIO that you want, any size air cooler. On this Falcon Northwest Mach V, typically it would come with a pretty thick 120 millimeter AIO. The one that I'm using here, for example, is the original Asetek one with 2 Skype fans and a push-pull. And with a 7800X3D, it actually keeps it perfectly within spec. And even today, Falcon Northwest sells their Tiki with a thinner 120 millimeter AIO for a 7800X3D, along with the other Ryzen chips. So it's going to be something that just, it's fine with those type of chips. If you're doing a 7800X3D, typically, the performance, you're going to be in the 60s. It can still get up high if you're doing like Cinebench or something like that, but it doesn't really thermal throttle. It still stays just in the 80s at most if you're doing Cinebench. Overall, pretty impressive. Obviously, like in the Be Quiet case, I have a 13900KS with a 360 millimeter AIO. That's going to handle that much better than the Mach V would handle the 13900KS. That's a CPU that I don't think I would really want to try in the Mach V. 120 millimeter AIO would not be enough to really dissipate that heat. The Ryzen chips are just a lot more efficient, and they generally handle that, fine. Even Falcon Northwest themselves, when they have to put a 13900, for example, the not K, just a regular 13900 in the Tiki, they don't do the K version, and they use that special Intel cooler that comes with just that particular CPU, and then it handles it fine. But they're not going to put a 13900KS in the small chassis with only a 120 millimeter fan. That then they reserve for the the cases like the Fragbox or the Talon, when they can fit like 280 millimeters, which then is going to be fine for that particular CPU. So that is a limitation. I did in the Main Gear Shift do a water-cooled build with a CPU a few years ago, and then if you're a little bit crafty, you can put 120 millimeter AIO sort of on the top of that Mach V, and you can even do 180 millimeter AIO on like the bottom right of the case. So that's certainly something you can do and connect it with tubing, and then theoretically you're getting a lot more radiator space, and then it even may be able to handle some of these hotter chips like the 13900K or something like that. But then that's like a custom water cooling, not something that maybe would make that much sense in this case because it has to be like a very custom layout, but it can be done, and it would be a way to get these like faster CPUs to thermally behave, at least in a case like this. Then something else that these cases actually do have in common, they both have support for like legacy drives, for example, like hard drives. I mean, the Mach V has like 6 hard drive bays that are very easy to access. And if you're going to do like traditional hard drives, it's a pretty awesome case for that, actually. And obviously, even this case still has, a 2 like DVD burners, which, obviously most people haven't seen in a very long time. But this Be Quiet case is interesting because it also has space that you can actually put a CD drive in it. And obviously it has a lot of hard drive space, given that it's a fairly conservative case and it's something that's like really big. So they keep that in mind for users that still want to use these setups, even in 2023. So as you can see, the Mach V isn't as outdated as perhaps some users would think, because a new case like the bequiet 901 comes with that very same option that maybe those users going from the Mach V to like a 901 makes sense for that particular use case. But I mean, I've asked Falcon why they haven't made a new version of the Mach V, and obviously, and I agree with them, it doesn't really make sense. What the Talon is smaller, and that does basically anything a high-end gaming computer can do, because most people just don't need a massive amount of room for drives and CD drives. There's just not that big of a market for it. And, if there is a use case for that, then you do have some cases that still offer that. And you can mostly fit a lot of that, and even in some of these smaller cases, especially going to SSDs and NVMe drives. So the technology has certainly shifted a considerable amount. But at least it's interesting to see. You can still put a very high-end system in the Mach V with a 7800X3D, thermally completely under control with that 120 millimeter thick AIO, and even a 4090. 4090 stayed in the 70s. In the Be Quiet case, stays in the 60s perhaps, and maybe like 4 to 5 degrees cooler. But that's going to just be due to the amount of airflow in a case like this compared to something like that. But I'm sure you can probably, customize it a little bit if you really wanted to make it work. And any GPU below that, like a 4080 even, is going to thermally behave a lot better because it's going to be less heat going into the system. So while these two case designs are separated by, like 7 years, I guess you could say even more than 7, because even though this particular Mach V is from 2016, I mean, that case has been going on for even longer before then. So there's a substantial amount of time difference between these cases. You can see they actually seem to have a lot more in common than separate. I mean, you throw a glass panel on that Falcon Northwest Mach V and maybe modify it a little bit where it can fit a 280 millimeter AIO. There are definitely ways to do that. Maybe the front you can put like a mesh panel or something like that, where you can take out the CD drives or take out some of those hard drives, put in a mesh panel. You could probably even fit a 360 millimeter AIO in the front, and then maybe open up the top somehow so the airflow is better for these new big GPUs. I don't think you would have to rework it all that much, honestly, in order to make it perform almost as good as any modern, airflow case. It just needs, some mesh panels, maybe some, fan placement, and a little bit more space for a bigger AIO. Certainly could be pretty interesting. And I know, both cases, let's say you walk into a room and they're both on. Obviously, the case with the glass panel and the RGB may kind of get your attention, but if you're used to seeing that type of stuff, you see the Mach V and it's extremely impressive. Just that really substantial, like monolithic case. I think for me, they're both equally as impressive, but seeing that Mach V, it's almost like it's a substantial piece of history. I think, in terms of like gaming computers. So certainly very cool to see. It's very interesting to compare these two cases and see that, yeah, it is actually kind of fun doing a modern build in something that was considered extremely high-end back in 2016. The case itself is still, fairly adequate even for the modern hardware. Obviously, it can be improved upon, and modern cases like that 901 from Be Quiet certainly have the, pretty big advantage in terms of just the thermal performance and having bigger AIOs and things like that. But At the end of the day, considering the time difference, very interesting, how nice these older cases are as well. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Let me know if you like this video. It's a little bit different, kind of like a little bit of like my passion project, just kind of messing around with these cases. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.